All right, everybody, welcome back to the Resilient Edge, where we dive deep into the strategies, stories, and skills that help individuals and organizations thrive in the face of adversity. As always, I'm Dave Weiner, your host. And in this podcast, we explore resilience in safety, security, crisis intervention, leadership, and much, much more. Every episode, we strive to bring you expert insights, real world experiences, and actionable takeaways to strengthen your preparedness and response in an unpredictable world. So let's go ahead and sharpen our edge together. Today's guest really needs no introduction. However, I'm going to do that as a courtesy to maybe some folks that have never heard of Mr. Scot Walker. However, I'm gonna put that to the test because I'm pretty sure not many people have not heard of Scot. But who is Scot Walker? He's a seasoned investigations and corporate security leader with more than 2 decades of experience, spanning federal law enforcement, military service, and global corporate security, where Scot and I have worked concurrently and together in some of those places. Sure. Scot has served as a special agent, task force officer, and later transitioned into senior corporate investigations roles with iconic companies like NVIDIA, Facebook, and Domtar. Much of his work is focused on internal misconduct, fraud, workplace violence prevention, protective intelligence, and executive protection. What I really appreciate about the conversation we're going to have today is Scot's perspective being especially valuable in his ability to connect operational security with generational resilience, mental health, and the evolving threat landscape. From misinformation and deepfakes, which is stuff we're going to talk about today, to economic instability and uncertainty facing today's professionals. That's just a long way of saying, welcome, brother. We have a huge history together, so I'm super grateful for you being here.
I was thinking the same thing, bro. You've been there through literally everything that I've done. So yeah, one of my oldest friends and oldest beat partner, and my team, everything.
Which explains all the drinking and therapy. So I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand.
Yeah. Whiskey helps. Want to hear?
Whiskey always helps. There's rarely a situation that whiskey isn't going to help, right?
Well, and I appreciate you having me on the Christmas episode. I wore my NORAD Christmas sweater. And
I love it.
For the folks at home that are watching that don't know the story behind NORAD, if you have kiddos that still believe they're Santa, have them go onto the NORAD website, and NORAD tracks Santa as he delivers his toys to good girls and boys all around the world. And if you don't know what NORAD is, that's the North American Aerospace Defense Command, basically the Air Force's version of a dispatch or command center that is tracking all flights throughout the United States and Canada. And so this has Canadian F-18s, where are my fingers? Canadian F-18s and F-22 Raptors.
And that is very non-bah humbug of you to wear that. We've had a ton of conversations. We've known each other for decades, but we've had a ton of conversations. And you talk about this concept. In essence, we're seeing real generational shifts in what I call our protector space, right? Or what we would call our protector space: security, law enforcement, dispatch, fire, all of those things, and in the corporate security environment. When you talk about law enforcement zero, security zero, and some of these other things, what challenges and opportunities do you see in that aspect? And first, I would invite you to kind of lay out what law enforcement and security zero is, so everybody has a general understanding.
Yeah, I'll give you the quick origin story, which is about 5 years ago. I was reading a number of books that kind of focused on demographics and the demographic decline in certain countries, including ours and others, and tried to understand what that impact would be to the workforce. So as I'm doing all this research, I'm looking at this through the lens of a law enforcement and corporate security lens and that view. And so I started looking at, gosh, if the loss of generations, and we'll get more into it and I'll explain what I mean by that, the loss of a generation of workers is impacting the kind of the general workforce. How will that impact specific industries like security and law enforcement? While they have a lot of similarities, military would be similar to that as well. I try to understand, where are we going with, you call them the protectors, great term. I like sheepdogs as well. We've talked about that. What happens when we have X amount of sheepdogs one day, and the next day we don't have that many sheepdogs. How is that going to impact society? And then what is business? What do individuals need to be resilient, which is why we talk about resiliency, right? So for me, it was really trying to understand how is a generation of workers impacting security and law enforcement. And so I came up with this term, maybe appropriated from a couple of different people that I listen to and follow in social media and read their books. Ian Bremmer is one of them. He wrote a great book and a series of books called G Zero, and he has a podcast, G Zero World. And I kind of got this idea, and his idea behind G Zero, or government zero, is the world's kind of decoupling. The United States is decoupling from agreements. And what came out of Breckinridge after World War II is now we don't have an iconic country to lead us, or a government to lead the world as we have over, even though we've been in the Cold War and all these other things, we don't have any one beacon of hope to lead the world anymore. And that's his theory with G Zero. And so I appropriated a little bit from that. And I thought, boy, we're in a law enforcement zero world. And so that's where I came up with the terminology law enforcement zero. And I'd love to get more into just explaining what that is and why I study demographics, why I study generations.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, is it not? So yeah, feel free to elaborate a little bit more on where you see the industry, where we're getting kind of exposure there. First, probably some of the challenges obviously is a lack of people wanting to do the job. I think that's one of the bigger things. What do you think is fueling some of that, in your
Great
opinion?
question. Yes, and especially when we look at the law enforcement zero side of this, and we'll talk in the general public safety form as well, but law enforcement zero specifically, every industry will be impacted by the loss of the baby boom generation. And this is the folks that are turning 60, 65 over the next 5 years. And in fact, the youngest baby boomer, depending on the dates of the demographers that you follow, they put the youngest baby boomer turning 65 in 2030. Average retirement age in the United States is 65. So we're losing that generation out of the workforce. And that's every industry, and different countries will be impacted slightly differently because why do we call it the baby boom generation? Why am I even using that term? The people that were born out of the World War II generation, or what's commonly known as the GI generation or the greatest generation, the children of that generation have been the biggest generation that the world has ever seen, and certainly the biggest generation the United States has ever seen. The world, as we know it, the infrastructure, everything was built for them, for their generation, and this was always going to happen. Right? This is simple math, right? Public school math. I barely graduated high school. I'm not afraid to say that. I wasn't great at math, so let's keep it simple. When you have a big generation of people that don't have another big generation of people, when you lose that generation out of the workforce, and again, we're not stereotyping, we're not blaming anybody. This is safe space, everyone. This was always going to happen because we have 28 million Americans that are turning 65 on a certain date. And so when you subtract that many of people potentially, now we know not every person who turns 65 is going to leave the workforce. But when they started backing into and comparing law enforcement jobs, as we know, and we'll get into security and firefighting a little bit, but law enforcement jobs specifically, we know, are not similar to normal careers, if you will. Or it's not like you're an accountant or a school teacher. You can be very different. So when you say, okay, everybody's turning 65, or the big generation's turning 65 in 2030, what does that mean for law enforcement? As I started researching this, I found that law enforcement, on average, retires at 55. So that means that we have passed the law enforcement retirement for the majority of law enforcement officers that are in that baby boom cohort, their generation. So the loss of that talent, the loss of that knowledge, the tribal knowledge, as I like to call it, is going to be superiorly impactful in our society. But wait, it gets worse. Not only are we losing baby boomers out of law enforcement, Gen X is the next generation after the boomers. We're not a big enough generation. Yeah. Yeah, as you can tell, we're breakfast clubbers. And we're the latchkey kids. We were always left at home. We were very inventive and we can entertain ourselves. We know what a rotary phone is, things like that.
I think the word you're looking for is feral. I think that's
Feral.
really
Yeah,
what you're looking
very
for.
fair. Yeah, compared. And the generation after us is a big generation. It's bigger than the Gen Xers, the millennials, but it's not as big as the boomers, the baby boom generation. So what you have, and when we compare this or line this up with our law enforcement partners who average retirement age is 55, and then back up even further, where have we been over the last 25 years? What happened just about 25 years ago? Planes crashed into buildings, global war on terror starts. Now, those of us who've been in this game for a long time, we know that it didn't start on September 11th. But what happened was DHS comes about, grants come about, agencies are getting SWAT vehicles and they're getting canine and they're getting airships and they're getting all this DHS money or this counterterrorism, anti-terrorism money funding. Governments are taking serious looks. Hey, if we're going to have a Christmas parade, we need 30, 40 more officers, depending on the jurisdiction. Everybody grew. Every agency was hiring. That was 25 years ago. Average retirement is 20 to 30 years. So we are in the beginning of folks who were hired at the beginning of the 2000s leaving the workforce and retiring themselves with their 20 or 30-year pension, right? Let's back it up even further. What happened in the 80s and 90s? We had the war on drugs, the Reagan war on drugs. Everybody remembers that. They hired a ton of people during the war, a ton of law enforcement folks during the war on drugs too. Those folks have 30, 40 years on the job and are going to be leaving in droves. Couple that with the social pressures that have been placed on law enforcement, I'll say over the last 20 years, but certainly over the last 10 years, and definitely over the last 5 years. When you look at the stages over the last 20, 25 years, what's been happening in law enforcement, both you and I came into law enforcement kind of post Rodney King, and there are incidents that have occurred in our world that define a generation or define characteristics of law enforcement. Rodney King was one of them. And we've had several now even since, right? So what had come out of Rodney King, the way we police changed. What came out of September 11th, the way we policed changed, right? And so even what happened after the riots, the Antifa riots in the late 2010s, COVID in 2020, all of those impacts are causing people who are currently in the career field to want to leave the career field. And it's showing past or current generations that are in that age group. So you don't usually see people entering law enforcement younger than 21 or older than 40. You can have people older than 40. And I served with an LAPD officer who was 70 when he went to the academy. That's awesome. Good on you. But traditionally, those are the ages. So that's a cohort, 21 to 40. Where are they in life? Let's look at, that's the millennial generation, and maybe even a little bit of Gen X, like very young Gen X, kind of tweeners. But the millennial generation, let's talk about them for a second, because they're the ones that, I hate to say it, they will save society because they're going to be the ones that are already in Congress, government leadership jobs. They're taking over. And you've heard me talk about the 25-year-old chief of police or the old head of security, right? So let's talk about that generation for just a minute, because millennials, and we tend to generalize, oh, millennials, they don't want to be in law enforcement. It's not so much that they don't want to. It's a lot of they can't. And their generation will find it tough. And here's why. So the millennials, mid to late 80s to just about 2000, maybe late 90s is their generation. So if you're born in between those dates, you're probably a millennial. They still understand analog versus digital, right? They were born in this as the PC world exploded and as the internet exploded, they came of age. A lot of them came of age in 2008 during the downturn in the economy. Their baby boom parents told them, you've got to go get your bachelor's degree and your master's degree and all this education, blah, 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 blah. So they did. And now they couldn't afford it because when their mom and dad, the baby boomers, went to school in the 60s, they paid $100 a class or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now they're adjoining themselves because, hey, mom and dad said, I got to go get a degree. And by the way, the economy sucks, so I might as well stay in college. Now they have saddled themselves because apparently we just give money away. They've saddled themselves with student debt. So what we're seeing out of this generation, the millennials, is a lot of them have too much debt to not find a job that pays them more money. What do we know about law enforcement? When you come in the door, probably not the highest paid job out there. Of course, we all know there's overtime. We all know you're going to get paid more every year and you go up in rank and so on and so forth. Of course. But the millennial generation is looking at this. Hey, I've got student loans that I can't go bankrupt. I have to do it and I can't get rid of it. Couple that with, oh, weed is legal now. I smoke weed all the time. Oh, how much did that work when we were first going into law enforcement in the 90s? Nobody would touch somebody who smoked weed. We still have a lot of those legacy ideas in law enforcement. Oh, I don't want somebody who's a pothead, right? And I'm not saying these things are good or bad. I'm just explaining why when we have a millennial generation, they don't want to go into law enforcement. They are also, like I've said, the most educated generation that we've ever had because they had the opportunities to pay for the much more expensive schools through government loans. Their parents pushed that on them. They didn't have the work that they could go out and do. It's hard for young people to start a business, much harder than it was for the baby boom generation and the GI generation, right? Couple that with we've been at war for 20 years, over 20 years, right? The global war on terror started in 2021 and it's going to this day. It will probably never end. We're seeing its effects daily. We just lost 2 soldiers in Syria, right? It's happening. They're seeing that. They have a front row view to that. They're also seeing their older brothers and sisters who have gone into these career fields, whether it be military or law enforcement, and they're coming back with injuries, with emotional strain, with talking about things that our predecessors, when we got into law enforcement, never talked about. They would just suck it up, right? That's the baby boom generation. Don't talk about it. We'll deal with it. So, of course, millennials don't want to go into law enforcement in mass. One, they can't afford it. They need to, and by the way, this is why they jump jobs. Not that they aren't satisfied. They're trying to work their way up to find that job that will pay them enough so they can pay off their student loans. They have all these great qualities too. We talk about the negative stuff, but they're really good at teamwork. They're really good with technology and they understand the difference and how to apply technology much better than our generation ever did, which makes them ideal for law enforcement. But then you put the social implications on top of that. The Black Lives Matter things that were happening in the late 2010s and how that was demonizing law enforcement. Of course, no one wants to go into law enforcement today, right? Why would you want to go in there? Not only is your agency prosecuting you or terminating you for all kinds of different reasons, you're being blacklisted because of the Brady lists that if people don't know what a Brady list is, certain states have a list of law enforcement officers who have been accused of providing false information. So they're not, so if they were to testify in court, they would be less credible. And this Brady list, by the way, exists with no recourse, right? If we want to prosecute somebody as law enforcement officers, we arrest them, they go through a process that is supposed to be fair and balanced. We know there's challenges there, but the Brady list, there is no recourse for somebody who's on the Brady list other than to petition the district attorney that put them on the Brady list. So you have all of that coupled with, okay, now we have a shrinking workforce. And now law enforcement zero. No one wants to be there. Not even the guys and gals that are there. Do they want to be there?
Don't you also, I think there's another thing at play that we've talked about that the public safety realm doesn't necessarily, especially nowadays with agencies being shorthanded. I think millennials and younger generations are looking for far more of a work-life balance than previous generations because our boomer generations, you went to go work for the same company for 30 years, right? You left with your cheap gold watch, right? And you just stayed there and you did all of these different things. And the way things have evolved, a lot of people, I think, are looking for more of a work-life balance that public safety never offers. All the overtime, the call outs, all of these different things that you and I also experienced during our careers. I think younger generations are looking for that, which is why and I think also the tech industry that you worked in, I think I don't want to use the word glamorize, but I think they really leaned into people are only going to stay at a job for 2 years and then they're going to move somewhere else because this place offers this where this other place didn't, right? So what are your thoughts around that? Because I think that's also another factor. All the things you said, absolutely true. But I think also that quote, work life balance that everybody tries to achieve is rarely achievable in public safety.
Yeah, if we're going to point fingers at the generation that started that work-life balance thing, we have to point it at the Gen Xers because we observed our parents, right? Our parents
Mm-hmm.
who were also highly educated baby boom parents, as mom and dad now are going back to the workforce, obviously with latchkey kids.
Mm-hmm.
So what Gen X wanted, and again, we might not have invented the internet, but we made everything that has come out of it, right? Folks like Zuckerberg, folks like Elon and the like are Gen X. So the world that Gen X has created in the business environment really doesn't lend itself to go and grind. And there are some exceptions there. The ability to work remotely and to take 2 days off out of the week and work from home, that has always been a thing, but the work environments of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even the 90s were always about we don't have the technology to be remote and still be present, right? So with the internet boom and doing what we're doing now, being able to be on and telework and bring up your camera on your laptop and talk to your coworkers. That's a relatively 10, 15-year thing. And prior to that, it was very expensive telecommunications equipment. And then how there were no tools that a boss had to make sure that their direct reports are doing what they should be doing when they're not there. So law enforcement, and that's the work life. Let's talk about law enforcement, how this applies. Because both you and I have, oh, I'm going to work on swing shift and I'll be there till midnight. And then, of course, you get a traffic collision, you get name the call, you get it. And
Mm-hmm.
you get a DUI, and now you got to go process them all night until 6 o'clock in the morning. And that does not lend itself to work life balance, right? Criminal investigator, my wife and I still talk about being literally on a crime scene for 24 straight hours, right? Process, because there's no one else who can do it, right? No one else can do what we did in the places that we did them. And that's, I'm not bragging, it's just those things happen. You want to successfully prosecute a crime, you've got to be there and be present for it. And so the people that see that in your life, they also don't want that for their life, right? And
Yeah.
I can speak specifically, hopefully both of my kids are going to listen to this. They never listen to me, by the way. You know them. You're their uncle. You're their funkle. Funkle or drunkle? Which one do you like? Fun uncle or drunk uncle?
I
You can be,
prefer drunkle is good. That's because I pretty much fun.
yeah,
Just
and fun all the time.
I'm fun, just add whiskey. That's it.
Yeah, but you talk to my kids about the things that we miss because we weren't able to be there. I didn't go to the majority of my daughter's water polo matches until I was in the private sector. And
Yeah.
I had the ability to go, hey, I got to go. And they were like, okay, yeah, go family first. We say that in law enforcement, but we don't really mean it. We mean mission first. And by the way, same thing in the military, right? The military is different in that you are ordered and you get a piece of paper that says you are hereby ordered to go to this place and do this thing. In law enforcement, it's the oath that we take to protect and defend. And so
Well,
that's not attractive to a lot of people.
and what's interesting is you point out like going to family events, right? And you hit on something that we do say a lot in law enforcement. In law enforcement, we say we're a family, right? That's your family. But then you have your family at home. And then you have these two competing notions of two families that are demanding things of you in different ways. And I don't mean demanding in a negative way, but things that, as my partner Jeff puts it, these are commitments we make. And that oath is a commitment that we're going to go do the things that we need to do. And then what frequently happens when you're on shift on patrol, I'm thinking about what's going on at home. And then when you're at home, you're like, hey, I wonder what the guys and gals are doing. So it's this thing where you have these competing interests in terms of what it means to, again, be in the protection realms. There's a lot of demands that are placed on you, and they're not just physical or mental. Sometimes they're spiritual in nature, right? And I think that's an important part of it, because when we start thinking about the future in terms of how we navigate these challenges. You mentioned the 25-year-old chief of police, and I know we've talked about this, so I really want our listener to really enjoy. So what do you, from a generational perspective, what are we doing to prepare that senior security leader or that senior corporate security leader, that chief of police? What are we doing to prepare that next generation?
I would certainly hope that law enforcement is still being resilient. I think the private sector has it much worse than law enforcement does, because resiliency, it's trained and built in through our training, through our certifications, through our experiences. The ICS process, the incident command process, is something that is based on resiliency and seniority, and it's not about who's got the most time in the job. It's got who's the best to be a leader. But with all that said, unfortunately, there just aren't enough. You're starting to see it a little bit. Gen Xers becoming chiefs of police, becoming into the more senior leader positions as the baby boom generation leaves the workforce and they go into retirement. But our generation is just not big enough. Just plain numbers, we are not big enough. So what has happened is the millennials are stepping up because they want to. Now, they're not being forced. They want to. They genuinely want to be leaders. And I think that's a great sign of that generation, is that they want to be collaborative. They want to make positive change. They are taking this seriously. But what don't they have that the baby boom generation, baby boom leaders have? 20 or 30 years grinding, doing the job. They have maybe 4, 5, 10 years. And we were talking about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where you see this in FTOs and field training officers, right? Where it's 2, 3 years on and they're an FTO. And you're like, wow, you just learned how to do the job and now you're training people. And certainly there's a number of reasons. They're also super educated compared to us and previous generations. So those are offsets. In the private sector, you really don't have this. You have people who've hung on to work, they've got to get the gold watch, and they're hanging on for dear life because the thing that they've done for 40 or 50 years as baby boomers is their identity. And so they struggle, I believe, with letting that go. And when you do that, you don't set up for succession. I've had these conversations with business leaders before, which is, what happens when you're gone? Nothing. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, what do we always say in law enforcement or in the military? Who does your job when you get hit by a bus? Right? And we got to have an answer for this in law enforcement. We have to have chain of command. We don't really have much knowledge about that in the private sector. And my sense of urgency around talking about demographics, talking about we're losing a generation, is really about resiliency. And it's really about succession planning. Because if you aren't teaching your future generation how to lead, you're going to get the 25-year-old chief security officer who's going to be like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I haven't seen decades of incidents that would help educate me on how to respond to these things. And so that's where my biggest concern is. I think in law enforcement, there's enough Before you become a chief, you go to additional supervisory training. Before you become a sergeant, shoot, there is most law enforcement agencies have requirements. You've got to do something educationally. You have to have a certain amount of time on. You have to interview, things like that. But what we're starting to see is the millennials and even some the older Gen Z are being thrust into leadership roles, whether they wanted to or not. Their boss was there one day managing things the day to day, and then they dropped their papers and said, "Now I'm out. I'm retiring." Okay, but who else? Who's taking your job? I don't know. We see this time and time again. I talk to security leaders, business leaders all over the place, and I ask them, "What are you preparing for? What does tomorrow look like?" The minute that they become sour with their work life, or they something happens in their private life and they just want to take more time to spend with the kids or fishing or whatever, they're gone. And there's nothing keeping them. So when somebody who's done something for 30 or 40 years leaves, they take all of that knowledge with them. And we have nothing specifically in law enforcement and to some extent in the private sector and corporate security. We have no way to retain that. No one's looking at how do we retain that information. There's no model to retain that information. And the reason why I can speak with some level of intelligence on that is because when I was at a private sector organization, I'll say, I was on a management team that presented to senior leaders in the organization what our biggest concern was for that organization. And it happened to come down to resilience. It happened to come down to, hey, we're losing all these people who know how to do this thing that has been around for 1,000 years. They know how to do this thing, and they are going to be gone. And you're not doing anything to ensure that they transfer that knowledge onto the next generation. Military law enforcement, we have traditions. We keep those things going. We understand them. You ask anybody who is in a law enforcement agency, how far back does your agency go? They'll tell you the history, right? Because they remember it. Ask somebody what meta was called before it was meta. Anybody know?
Yeah.
I do. I work there. But
Yes.
a lot of people don't know the evolution of where they're working. And then they're thrust into these positions, or they're thrust into this responsibility. And I just am concerned the private sector is not prepared for what some call the silver tsunami, where you're going to have all that legacy gone. And it's like they're turning the lights off as they go out the door. It's not, oh, they'll be gone over time. We don't have decades to prepare for this. It's happening today. 12,000 people a day, workers, are retiring. And what knowledge do they transpose onto somebody? They ask them. Most of them will probably say it would take you decades to learn what I know about this industry or this job, unfortunately.
I'm assuming you feel that probably applies to our EP executive protection partners too, right?
It does. And EP is really interesting when you look at it in the kind of the hierarchy of corporate security. I think one of the things that will help EP the most is that they have a lot of military and law enforcement folks that are in executive protection. And we have, because again, we've been at war for 20 years, we have a ton of talent. The talent pool is broader than any other division, I guess, if you will, of corporate security or other kind of specialty in corporate security. My sense is that they'll do the best out of all corporate security roles, executive protection, because they can get a lot of talent from retiring law enforcement, from people coming out of the military that have great experience, by the way, in pretty crazy incidents and handling high stress situations. I think the one thing that's lacking in executive protection is that white glove treatment, the ability to deconflict or to de-escalate, and the ability to figure out how do you network around challenges that the executive or the protectee might have in a way that doesn't include you flashing a badge saying, hey, I'm with LAPD or I'm with NYPD and I need to get around your blockade or whatever it is. So I think that EP will experience some of the benefits from that. I also think when we talk about, you said it earlier, security zero, what does that look like in the long run as we are losing talent even out of the corporate security world? And there's so many iconic leaders that we are going to lose out of our industry, that they've been in it for 50 years and they're one day they will just want to spend more time with the grandkids. And so they
Hmm.
just won't do it. What does that mean for our industry? I do think that that's something that we need to be prepared for. And I don't think that anybody except for us is really talking about this. Christian West is talking about this.
Yeah.
And I've been on a panel with him. I was on a panel with him a couple months ago talking about this.
Yep.
And I keep trying to ring this bell like, hey, folks, just be prepared. Be prepared that when you wake up one day and you say, I used to have 25 executive protection folks that I could call on that were solid, you will have half of that, perhaps.
And I also think because you have, to your point, a lot of people leave law enforcement, or they may go from a corporate security gig and they may move into an EP role. And typically, EP in the past has been very focused on physical attributes more than anything else. And you and I have had the fortunate opportunity this past year to train an iconic company. I'm not going to say which one, in a skill that I think is needed, and I know you do too. But when we start talking about, and you mentioned a de-escalation, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about a lot of different things that security folks don't normally get. They don't get a lot of training around identifying mental illness or understanding the behaviors associated with it. And you and I have had a lot of conversations around, and what do? I teach this stuff to law enforcement. And periodically you get, why do I need to know that? I'm not a doctor. I don't need to know if somebody has schizophrenia. I can't even spell schizophrenia, right? But the reality is, no one's asking you to figure out exactly what they have. What you need to understand is, just like the penal code, there's elements of the crime. These are elements of behavior, and identifying appropriate behavior and being able to apply the appropriate techniques, interventions, whatever you want to call them, to address those situations. So, do you see mental health playing a bigger role in protective intelligence and other things in terms of a really modern EP team?
Yeah, that's what I loved about the training that we did for that company was we had a lot of, I think the majority of them were former law enforcement, tier one
Yeah.
operators from the military. And something that I know they have never talked about is how do you help your partners when
Mhm.
they might be going through a stressful situation? Because I know in law enforcement, we don't really talk. It's better now than it was when we were first doing it. I think there's a lot more focus on it over the last 5, 10 years, which is where it should be. Unfortunately, it hasn't really translated over to the private sector much. I was at a tech company when I first left law enforcement, and within the first, I think, 6 weeks, we had a spouses of a employee died tragically on at our campus, and so we had to handle it and deal with it, and I treated it like I would have treated it when I was in law enforcement. We handled everything. The officers that worked there ended up tried to revive the patient successfully, but after everything was calmed down and emergency services left, I'm sitting there with these officers, these young men and women, going, okay, how you guys doing? And no, but there was nothing, no assistance for them. I called HR. Hey, can we get a counselor out here? And they're like, what are you talking about? A counselor for what? Oh, I, these folks are doing chest compressions on somebody, right?
Yes.
They're tore up. This is not part of their training, right?
Yep.
And so I think we can always do better. I think it is a pretty significant challenge, not only due to the job, the realities of doing this kind of work, what we're seeing in society. We have seen, and you and I were talking about this just the other day, we've seen a number of violent incidents occur around security folks, around high net worth folks. And tragically in Hollywood, unfortunately, we see this quite often now, or more often. So besides having to deal with the realities of the job, the generations that are going into this role or that aspire perhaps to go into this role make mental health a priority. And so I'm speaking specifically millennials and Gen Z as they move into executive protection. If they need a mental health day, they'll tell you. One thing that's amazing about Gen Z is they speak truth to power. They are not afraid. And whereas us Gen Xers or even the baby boomers, I need to be there for my team. My mental health is not important. I want to be there for the team. And there's goods and bads there, though. If we don't focus and we don't make this a priority, we'll continue to lose people to the challenges of mental health if it goes unabated. So not only do we have a generation that's coming in that understands that, they understand it better than anybody, and they prioritize it over even their employment. We've got another generation that doesn't understand that. And so you have these kind of competing generations that are coming together in the executive protection world. And it hasn't really been a topic that we've addressed. But understanding what we do is stressful, what is stressful, and then just the travel can be stressful for some folks.
Yeah.
They're not the protectee that gets a nice bed at the end of the night, they get a hot shower or a hot meal. Sometimes we're eating in the motorcade, or we're preparing for the next movement, and we just don't have time to even do bodily functions, right? So that all compounds on EP folks in the corporate security world more than kind of anybody else. And so I like the training that we did because it made that a focus. We talked about dealing with people that are in mental health crisis around the protectee, something that I've been to a number of government funded executive protection schools or PSD schools, and they've never talked about what about the mental health of somebody who's near the protectee, who the protectee considers a friend or family member. And we tragically, again, have just seen this happen in Hollywood. So it's not like it's not happening. It's not like you can't say you didn't know. We've got to be on top of this. And it's got to be a core skill, just like shooting is, just like driving is, just like your first aid and your medical training is. It's got to be something that you practice and that you consider part of your training regimen. And by the way, would give you some kudos, bro. Without exception, you're one of the leaders who's putting not only law enforcement folks through the paces in regards to dealing with people in mental health crisis, but we've now done it with a number of security organizations that are taking it seriously. Oh, we're dealing with this on a daily basis. And their officers, their security officers, security staff are dealing with this. And they're not equipped to, or they weren't previously. We're starting to equip them now. So that's where I think that's going.
And it's interesting because whether you're in security, EP, you train for a variety of eventualities, right? And that Sentinel event is the one that you train for, which is you should, right? You should always train for those things. But you're more likely to encounter somebody who is just in crisis, right? Just having a bad day, right? And your protectee can have a bad day. A family member of the protectee can have a bad day, and you're more likely to get involved in something like that where you need softer skills, right? And to your point, I think that's what's missing, right? And that's a huge missing piece. And the other thing too is that also plays into protective intelligence and threat assessment too, right? Because if we're only looking at it through the lens of, is this person a threat, rather than saying what's going on here, we should be asking what's going on rather than instantly assigning a label saying, oh, this person's a threat. What's really going on here? And are we able to interdict in that pathway in an appropriate way? I think we just need to ask better questions. I think that's really where we're at, especially when people are in crisis. The other thing that I think is impactful, at least to, as we talk about the industry as a whole, whether it's EP, whether it's law enforcement, security, since the advent of the internet, and I'd also like to point out, thankfully, the internet was not around when you and I were youngsters, right? That could be a problem. There's no recorded activity of Dave or Scott, which is good. But when we start thinking about the sheer volume of information that we are exposed to on a routine basis, and you and I have also discussed this with others, but the sheer amount of misinformation and all these deep fakes and all of these things that are out there, tell me your thoughts around all of that, because what's interesting to me is I may see a post on X or Instagram or something like that, and I'll look at it and I'll look at it with a bit of a skeptical eye, right? Because you have to now. But when we talk about generation, sometimes there isn't that discernment. I think our line of work makes us be like, you always build yourself as a professional skeptic, right?
That's right.
But the reality is that there's so much misinformation out there that I think that also plays a role in the protective services and for them to be able to do the things they need to do. Sure, everybody would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, especially when it comes to online content. I don't believe anything I hear and only half of what I see, right?
Yeah.
We've said this in law enforcement as well as trust but verify and
Mm.
those kinds of things. I didn't even trust NCIC, National Crime Information Center. I don't even trust when you see criminal history on somebody because I've been in those situations just like you have. And this will make sense, but let me use a quick story. I've been in those situations where you've got somebody who pops for a warrant and you're like, John Smith and this date of birth, that was probably the guy. Oh no, you better check those descriptors. You better make sure that height weight is close or
Yeah.
you'll understand why. Right. So I've been in those situations where you go to serve an arrest warrant and the person's, that's not even me. Right. The descriptors
Mhm.
don't match for whatever reason. So now we live in a world that is almost completely digital, that we can be captured at any minute on a range of devices. There are not only listening devices, but camera devices everywhere. And that can be shared at a moment's notice. We have unprecedented access to information. X is a great example of this. I monitor that pretty when we talk about protective intelligence. What are some of the good tools? I think TweetDeck's a great tool. Constantly monitoring TweetDeck to understand what is going on in the world, who's saying what. When I hear inklings that an incident has kicked off, I don't go to YouTube. I certainly don't go to Facebook or Instagram. I go to X and I start looking for that, what I call digital exhaust. Somebody's going to post on their personal page, oh, yeah, this aircraft just crashed or whatever. That's where I start looking because I know people push that information quickly. Now, couple that with this great thing that we have, which is artificial intelligence, and not going to go down the rabbit hole with that. People are interested in trying to understand that more. They should be, because it's something that has impacted our lives tremendously and will continue to impact our lives. So much. I used to think that social media would disrupt elections. And we've seen that, right? We in our own country have had our elections disrupted because social media. And I'm not going to say what kind or what side, it doesn't matter. Everybody uses social media to manipulate their message. The same thing is true with deep fakes. But what are deep fakes and why do I mention it in the same breath as artificial intelligence? Essentially, you utilize artificial intelligence, which is just computer learning, to design images or video that supports your narrative. And if you're China or Russia or a country that doesn't like America or our values, or you're ISIS or you're whoever trying to manipulate how we do what we do as Americans, it's very easy today. And this is where I think a lot of people don't quite understand it because they're like, I'm not going on that I call it Chad, but Chat GTP. I'm not going on Chat GTP. It's going to steal my information. Because we have so many people that are afraid of AI, they don't know or can't comprehend its application.
Yeah.
So they don't also know what to look for when we see these images manipulated. And I'll harken back even to when we were talking initially about one of the big seed changes in law enforcement for our generation of law enforcement officer was the Rodney King situation, which was recorded on a camcorder. And people don't know what that is. Just Google it. It'll take you way back in history. But it was recorded, and it was an image that was uploaded into the news media. Is the only way we got it was because we watched it on television. Flash forward 35 years, and I can watch it on my handheld device instantly. So imagine how impactful that video is and was to the people of Los Angeles. We all know what happened after that. and to LAPD and how it changed California law enforcement, and I think the rest of the United States law enforcement. But it happens instantly now. On top of that, if I was nefarious and I wanted to take that image and manipulate it to make it better or worse or whatever, put sounds in it, I can do that in near real time, right? And that's only going to get better. That's only going to accelerate, because that's what we're seeing is the ability to control a narrative, the ability to change facts to fit what you want it to be. It used to take Hollywood to do it. And Hollywood made a great movie called Wag the Dog. I highly recommend it. It's an indie film. Highly recommended. I think it was late 90s, early 2000s. Great movie about how people manipulate the message. And so when we talk about things that are happening in the world, whether it be with law enforcement, whether it be with organizations, we have to ask ourselves, and I heard somebody recently say this, so I can't take credit for it, but I'll relay this to the Resilient podcast audience, which is just say to yourself, maybe. Did Trump say XYZ? Maybe, because we don't know what we're seeing and if it has been created for and by a nefarious or a bad actor to push a narrative. We also don't know, are we seeing this in our news feeds from social media because they're trying to push a narrative? And I'm not going to get into the tinfoil hat stuff. I'm just saying that we should have the same approach that we had in law enforcement 30 years ago, which was, I don't believe anything that I hear and only half of what I see. And I think that's a really good way to look at everything that's in our face. And we take that step back and we go, maybe, let me do some more research. And there's been a number of times you and I, we share stuff all the time on our chat apps. And hey, something happens one part of the world. Hey, are we seeing that for reals? And we've got several groups that we're in and we're talking to different people. And it happens all the time. And if I'm at my desktop, I'm immediately going to the source. I'm going to see if I can verify it, see what's going on, so that I can get out to our community, our brothers and sisters. This is what I'm seeing, right? This is what's real. This is what's not potentially real. This is what I'm hearing. And I'm going to use all the tools available to me as an OSINT investigator, open source intelligence investigator, to understand the world and understand what I'm seeing. Unfortunately, most people aren't going to take the time to do that. And that's a real problem. So I intentionally follow, I hate the term influencers, but friends, I'll say, in social media that, one, come from the same world that I do, and two, I know they do the due diligence that I trust what they're saying. And I've had conversations with them. The maker of this shirt is one of them. It will continue to become a real problem, to the point where, what does every law enforcement officer have? Uniform law enforcement officer, for the most part, everybody's got a body cam. You remember when we were first in law enforcement, what did we carry on our belt that was similar to a body cam? We carried a little cassette recorder, and every traffic stop, you'd turn it on because somebody would say, they'd call the watch commander and say, Officer Walker was a poo-poo head to me, and he called me all these names. And I just produced the tape. Here's the traffic stop. I did not. So now everybody's got a body cam, and everybody records everything. And I don't mean to say conspiratorially that doesn't matter, but that can be manipulated very easily as well. So what I tell people is, this really focused, what I'm going to say is really focused at the command staff level right now. Listen to me, chiefs, captains, lieutenant commanders. Listen to what I'm saying, mayors, directors of public safety. You need to be communicating at a pace and at a frequency that the bad guys do. And that is near real time. And there's a couple of agencies that do this really well. If I can brag for a minute or just gush about what I've seen and what I see in social media, Las Vegas PD is an example. They're on it. Whenever they have an officer involved shooting, they're putting information out. So it's hard to manipulate When somebody comes out and says, here's the cell phone camera footage of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police officer doing something heinous, it's already been broadcast by LVMPD, right? LAPD is another really good one. Any use of force, any law enforcement related injury, any in custody death, they put together a comprehensive video that demonstrates this is what happened, this is what our policy is, and we take these things very seriously. But that's two agencies, two of the big agencies that have the budgets to do this. There are thousands of smaller agencies that don't have the budget to do this, and they won't be able to communicate the way the bad actors can. And so deepfakes, they're going to take your body cam footage because they can get it, and they're going to manipulate it. And they are going to drive the riots and the social disruption that we have seen, yet on a bigger scale, if it fits their narrative.
I think the other thing that a lot of that information or mis or disinformation does, obviously, to your point, not everybody is being as diligent or as skeptical as you or I or others that have a similar mindset in trying to vet information because it's coming out of speed and velocity, which makes it very hard sometimes to look at, which obviously creates a lot of uncertainty. And then people either share or retweet things that may be mis or disinformation, especially as it relates to a lot of things that pop up in the news cycle. And they perpetuate a narrative that somebody put out there in a small way that might be mis or disinformation. And now it is magnified and gets a million retweets because, or reshares on X because people are doing that because they're not validating things. And so, what's your thought now that we know that we have this uncertainty around the economy, global evolving threats, all of these different things? What are a few things you would share with some of our security, law enforcement, fire, EMS, all of our folks, those professionals? What would you suggest they do to stay grounded? Because sometimes a lot of the mis and disinformation, to your point, is related to body cam or some incident that occurred. And now law enforcement agencies are behind the power curve trying to get information out. So, and as professionals, we see this and we have a tendency to go, wait, what? That didn't happen. It didn't happen like that. But by the time the agency puts out their official whatever, this is already spiraled out of control. So obviously, as professionals, we see that stuff. So what would you recommend for staying grounded, staying effective, and not getting too mired in the nonsense out there? What are your thoughts there?
It's the best evidence theory. And it's not really a theory. We want, as we prosecute crimes, and all the law enforcement listeners will understand this, I need to have the best evidence to support the allegation against the suspect, right? And every district attorney, every U.S. attorney is going to want to see that. What's the best evidence? The best evidence is the actual evidence. It's not photographs of the knife. It's not photographs of the dope. It's the actual dope or the knife, right?
Yeah.
And they pull it out in court and go, this is the knife that was used. So the same aspect that we want to see where, and as an online or OSINT investigator, I look at these things as well. I try to find, where was that first post? Who posted that? Have they posted stuff like this before? Is this something that are they known for putting out bad sentiment or negative sentiment? That's something I worked on when I was at another technology company that rhymes with Facebook. And so we would look at what the information was being put out by who and what kind of things were being said about it. Was it going viral, if you will? And I tend to now disbelieve things that I think people are pushing a narrative more than they're sensationalizing it. And so my kind of initial feeling, to answer your question, is you're going to see it. You can't unsee it, but trust that there's another side to that story. And this is really important to talk about because, especially law enforcement, I'll say public safety too, we are a small community. We all like to talk about each other. And, oh, did you hear about so-and-so's traffic stop and this shooting and that? And we all want to say something about it. We all have, it's a community. We say we're a family. We also don't always treat each other like we would in a family. And sometimes that's warranted, sometimes it's not warranted. The facts remain. I learned from a great supervisor, a Homeland Security investigation supervisor, who, when something happened to one of our team members, he told me, I can't talk about it. And I was like, okay, is the person okay? Can't talk about it. Okay. That was his answer, right? Whether I liked it or not, that was the answer. And I think we need to try and practice that a little bit more, especially now with our law enforcement partners, not to be judgmental, not to jump to conclusions, and to just trust that, am I seeing the best evidence? Am I seeing evidence that's been manipulated to create some type of emotion in me, right? Because we all know this, Lady Justice is blind, and the scales that she holds are even. One is not higher than the other. She's blind, she's blindfolded because it doesn't matter what somebody looks like. It only matters what the facts are. And I think, look, we all know this in law enforcement. We all know this in the private sector even, but it's not something that we practice as much as we could when it comes to the things that we're seeing that may be involving our partners or even folks in our own agency or our own organization. And now it's out there in the world and you're on your heels going, wait a second, what are you talking about? What is this? And I have caught and identified a number of social media accounts and postings that were intentionally trying to draw traffic to them and that have been created to pretend to be something that they're not, to pretending to be a resource from the actual organization, and they weren't. And while they weren't posting things that would be damaging to that organization, they were trying to pretend to be the organization in a hopes that in the future they could. And so when I look at things like that, I look at the information that's online and presented to us in a really different light. And I say, maybe, but what else can I look at? Can I go talk to the person who's involved in the situation and say, hey, did this happen? What happened? Look, we all know that everybody has a Fifth Amendment right not to say anything, but that stuff aside,
Yeah.
you might want to do some more research before it influences you to go one way or the other.
Excellent. Excellent. My brother, I think we have cornered the market on generational resilience and a lot of other amazing topics today. That is all for today, but thank you so much for jumping on here and sharing your wisdom and knowledge. I know our listeners definitely appreciate it. So thank you for being here today.
Happy to do it. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Excellent. Everybody, that is it for our show today. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on The Resilient Edge.